The night was dark, the sea stretched endlessly, and on the deck of an American warship young sailors stood guard, unaware that within moments their lives, and the very course of war, were about to change forever. The air carried a strange tension, like the calm before a storm. But this storm was not of rain or thunder. It was of fire, steel, and sacrifice. A Japanese pilot, high above in the sky, had already made his choice. His mission was not to return home. His mission was to crash his aircraft, packed with explosives, into the enemy ship below. It was not just an attack. It was a message, and the world was about to witness the first kamikaze strike in history. By the mid-years of World War II, the Pacific had become a graveyard of ships and men. The waters that once shimmered with sunlight now ran red with the blood of sailors. Japan's pilots were once feared for their skill and precision, but now the balance had shifted. America, with its endless resources, advanced weapons, and massive fleets, was pushing Japan back. Defeat was no longer just a possibility, it was a shadow looming closer each day. In Tokyo, military leaders faced a desperate truth: conventional tactics were no longer enough. They needed something else. Something that would terrify their enemy and prove that the spirit of Japan was unbreakable. And so, the idea of kamikaze was born. The word itself meant divine wind, a reference to the legendary typhoons that had once saved Japan from Mongol invaders centuries earlier. But in this new war, the divine wind would not be a storm of nature, it would be young men, turning their own lives into weapons. Their planes would carry bombs and fuel, but the greatest weapon of all would be their willingness to die. October 1944, the Philippines. The Battle of Lake Gulf raged with a fury the world had never seen. The skies were thick with smoke, the waters with burning wrecks. The American fleet was massive, and Japan was bleeding. In this chaos, a decision was made. A group of young pilots would be chosen for a mission unlike any other. They were told plainly, "You will not return." Their planes would be filled with explosives, and their only task was to fly straight into enemy ships. Can you imagine? A young pilot, barely out of his teenage years, is handed a paper and asked, "Will you give your life for your country?" And he signs it without hesitation. His family receives a letter, praising his courage, but never telling him the truth, that he will never come back. That this mission is a one-way journey. For the pilot, there is no fear on his face, only a strange calm. Because once he has accepted his death, he feels strangely free. That night, aboard the American ships, the sailors tried to relax. The sky was quiet, the ocean was still, and then, suddenly, alarms began to scream. A blip appeared on the radar. A Japanese aircraft was approaching. The gunners rushed to their positions. They had fought off countless raids before. But this one was different. The plane did not weave or turn. It did not release bombs and fly away. Instead, it flew straight, steady, like a hawk locked onto its prey. The American gunners opened fire. Traces lit up the night sky. Explosions echoed in the distance. But the plane kept coming. Faster, closer, lower. Its wings gleamed in the dim moonlight, loaded with death. And inside sat a pilot who did not intend to live through the next minute. His heart pounded. The target loomed ahead, a massive American carrier, its deck lit faintly in the night. He tightened his grip on the controls. He thought of his mother, of the last time he had bowed before her. He thought of his comrades who had already fallen. He thought of his emperor, for whom he was about to give his life. There was no turning back. He whispered a final prayer, and then pushed the nose of the aircraft downward. On the deck, sailors screamed. Some prayed. Some fired desperately at the diving plane. But nothing could stop it now. With a thunderous roar, the aircraft crashed into the ship's deck. The world erupted in fire. The explosion shook the sea itself. Men were thrown into the air, into the flames, into the water below. Within seconds, chaos reigned. For the Americans, it was unlike anything they had ever seen. Enemy pilots had always tried to survive, to fight another day. But this was different. This was a man who turned himself into a living bomb. Shock ran through the ranks. Confusion, fear, and in that moment, one word spread across the fleet: kamikaze. The damage was real, but more than the steel torn apart, it was the minds of the sailors that bore the scar. Every shadow in the sky became a threat. Every incoming plane could be the next kamikaze. Sleep vanished. Peace vanished. The war had changed forever. The fire from the first kamikaze strike still burned in the memory of every American sailor who had witnessed it. The wreckage of that attack was not just metal twisted and charred, it was the shattered belief that war followed predictable rules. Until that night, combat had always been a contest of survival, of fighting hard enough to live another day. But the kamikaze changed everything. These were men who fought not to live, but to die. And death, when chosen as a weapon, was almost impossible to stop. In the days that followed, the skies above the Pacific grew darker. Radar operators scanned constantly, their eyes never leaving the flickering screens. Every signal, every approaching plane could mean another suicide dive. The gunners stood tense at their stations, fingers always ready on the triggers. The American fleet was powerful, but against such determination, even the strongest armor felt fragile. It wasn't long before more came. One after another, Japanese planes filled with explosives hurled themselves into American ships. Some were shot down before they could strike. But many broke through. They hit carriers, destroyers, cruisers, each impact shaking the sea, each explosion carving fear deeper into the hearts of the men who watched helplessly. A sailor later wrote in his diary, "We no longer see them as planes. We see them as falling stars of death. When you look up, you can almost feel their eyes staring back, ready to die just to take you with them." But behind the terrifying spectacle, there were human beings. The kamikaze pilots were not demons or machines. They were young men, some barely 20 years old, told that their highest honor was to give their lives for the emperor. Before each mission, they gathered together in quiet rooms. They were served sake. They were handed headbands with the red rising sun, a symbol of their destiny. They wrote farewell letters, often beginning with the words, "Dear Mother," or "Dear Father." Some confessed fears they dared not speak aloud. Others promised that their deaths would protect Japan. Then, they walked silently to their planes, each step carrying the weight of finality. One pilot wrote to his sister, "When you hear the news, do not cry. Think of me as a bird flying into the sky, free forever. My body will burn, but my spirit will be with you." These words never reached her until after the war, when his letter was delivered among the ashes of defeat. For the Americans, every successful strike carried devastating consequences. Ships were crippled, fires spread uncontrollably, and men were lost in moments of unimaginable chaos. But perhaps the greatest impact was psychological. How do you defend yourself against an enemy who uses his own life as the weapon? How do you fight a man who believes death is victory? For the sailors, there was no answer, only sleepless nights, haunted by the sound of engines diving closer and closer. As the months passed, kamikaze attacks multiplied. At Okinawa, one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific, the sky itself seemed alive with these suicide planes. Nearly 2,000 kamikazes were launched during that campaign alone. The ocean became a graveyard not only for ships, but for the very souls of those who fought. Carriers erupted in flames. Destroyers split in half. Entire crews were lost in single strikes. For every American victory, there came another kamikaze, another desperate dive into fire. And yet, in the midst of this storm of death, the Japanese pilots were not all eager martyrs. Many wrestled silently with doubt. Some longed to live, to see their families again, to grow old. But in a nation that painted sacrifice as glory, they had little choice. Refusal meant shame. Refusal meant dishonor. For many, it was not just a decision of the heart, it was a burden forced upon them. One former kamikaze, who survived only because his plane malfunctioned, later confessed, "I did not want to die. But everyone around me believed it was the highest honor. How could I tell them I wished to live? I smiled and nodded. I tied the headband around my forehead. And I walked toward death, even though my heart was crying." This duality, honor and despair, was what made the kamikaze both terrifying and tragic. To the Americans, they were enemies to be feared. To the Japanese, they were heroes to be remembered. But to themselves, they were young men caught in a storm far greater than their own lives. As news spread across the Pacific, the Americans adapted. They built stronger anti-air defenses. They developed tactics to detect and destroy incoming planes earlier. They fought with even greater ferocity. But no matter how many defenses they placed, no matter how many kamikazes they shot down, some always broke through. And each time, the sight was unforgettable. A plane screaming from the sky, smoke trailing behind, flames bursting as it struck the steel deck with a final, deafening roar. By the time the war neared its end, thousands of kamikaze pilots had taken their final flight. Some hit their targets. Many were shot down before they could. But each one carried the same certainty: they would not return. For Japan, it was both a symbol of loyalty and a symbol of desperation. For America, it was a nightmare that seemed endless. And then, finally, the war ended. The atomic bombs fell. Japan surrendered. The skies over the Pacific grew quiet once more. The kamikaze flights stopped. Silence returned to the ocean. But the memory never left. In Japan, shrines were built. Letters of farewell were preserved. The kamikaze pilots were remembered as martyrs, young men who had given their lives for their homeland. Families visited their graves, some with pride, some with tears. In America, the memory was darker. Veterans spoke of the terror of watching a plane dive straight toward them, of the helplessness of waiting for impact. For them, the kamikaze was not a symbol of honor, it was the embodiment of fear. Yet beyond honor, beyond fear, beyond the politics of war, lies the human truth. The first kamikaze pilot, that young man who chose, or was chosen, to dive into history, was not born to die this way. He once laughed, once dreamed, once looked at the stars and imagined a future. And so did the hundreds who followed him. But in the storm of war, they were turned into weapons. Perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all. That men so young, so full of life, were told that their worth lay only in their death. That the sea, already filled with the cries of the fallen, had to take even more souls who might have built families, written books, painted pictures, lived long lives. Instead, they became fireballs in the sky, remembered as the divine wind. The first kamikaze strike was not just an explosion on a ship's deck. It was the sound of humanity crossing a line it had never crossed before. It was a moment when the will to live was transformed into the will to die for a cause. And it left scars not only on steel and flesh, but on the very soul of mankind. When we remember that night, when we picture that first pilot diving from the heavens, let us not only see the fire and destruction. Let us also see the human being inside that cockpit, a boy with a beating heart, flying into eternity. Because war does not only destroy nations, it destroys futures. And in the roar of that first kamikaze, countless futures burned away in the fire.